Okay, hi. Welcome to Squint Opera's editing tutorial. This is 101, so this is an introduction to our Squint Opera workflow. Working in Premiere Pro. Here is 2015. This is the latest version, so this has got renewed sort of EXR support and everything, so it's worth working in that version. So first thing we'll talk about is just start a new project. So I've obviously started up Premiere Pro here, and then we have here our recent projects and when they were last opened. But also what we're going to look at is first just open a new project. So clicking on a new project, we get greeted with this window. We've got the name for the project, so we'll just call this editing tutorial. And I'm going to put an underscore in there because that's good practice. And then the location, so just for the realms of this, I'm just going to put this on my local computer, so you can browse there if you want. And this basically sets where our autosaves, etc. go to. We kind of want to keep our previews and that on locally, so we're not filling up the P drive, but maybe our project autosave would be within a folder that exists within the project. Okay, once we're happy with that, we'll click OK. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the interface overview. Basically, we have here our various bins, and these can be moved about and basically placed in different positions. So if I drag this, and you see you get this little sort of highlighted area as to where it be, so that will be center within that, and then basically that will split that into two parts. And if we ever basically want to reset our workspaces, we can go to Window Workspaces. We have a list of workspaces there, but we can reset to the saved one, and then that will bring us back to where we was. So moving on, we have our windows. We have our project window here. We have our source window, which will show our source footage. Our program window, which will tie in with our timeline window, and that will show what is happening on the timeline. And then here at the moment we have effects, and these are going to be changed into various other stuff. So there's lots of things that we can have in our windows, and we can basically set up our workspace as we deem we want to. We've got the options as well to work with dual screens, which is probably normally the way that we would work. Okay, so first off, we're going to look at importing some footage. Now, Premiere can deal with various types of different footage, from movies such as QuickTimes, H.264s, RED files, so R3Ds, RAW and ARRI RAW, etc. But it can also deal with file sequences, so whether it's JPEGs or whether it's DPXs or Targas or whatever. So basically the first thing we're going to do is we're going to basically try and keep things tidy. The idea with this is to be as well as obviously do your work, but you do work in a very organized manner so that it's very easy to pass on to other people, and people aren't struggling with lots of files and they just don't understand what's going on. So we're going to create a bin, and my personal thing is just to number things first, because then you get a nice sense of order to this. And I'm going to call this sources. Now obviously that could be many things, and you could break it down into whatever. So we could have secondary folders within that that basically contain, movies or QuickTimes or certain shots, or certain days in which footage was captured, etc. So you can break that down. And what is probably good to think about is maybe the folder structure that exists outside of Premiere. So maybe you can replicate that. One thing that we'll look at as well is that you can drag footage in. So basically you can actually drag a folder into that and retain that folder structure and bring in all the files that way. But what we do is, as ever with most programs, there's about 3 or 4 different ways of doing stuff. So like I say, you could either drag stuff directly in, but that won't quite work with what we're going to do here with image sequences. So what I'm going to do is bring in an image sequence. So I can either double click here, as you see, that'll open up, and then it'll bring in this window. So I can then select footage that I want to bring in and find stuff, so I can navigate between here. And what we're going to do is just use some image sequence from a short film. And what you notice here is this is called SO70, so this is shot 70. So what I'm actually going to do as well is cancel like that and do this a slightly different way. But first off, I'm going to create a bin, and I'm going to call that 070. So anything shot wise will go into that folder. So if we start off in this manner, then hopefully it's very easy to keep it tidy to start with, rather than having to tidy up a bit later when you've got hundreds and thousands of files in here. So what I'm actually going to use as a shortcut, if you go up to here, you've got all your various things that you can actually do, and one of those is import. And if you notice there's Control I. So I'm going to do Control I, and it comes up, and I'm going to pick my last take, and you notice this is a TIFF sequence. So ticking this here where it says image sequence, I can then open and bring it in. So that basically comes into my window here, and what I'm going to do is just create another bin, and I'm going to bring in 060, I think. And let's have a look at what this is. So there's lots of versions of that. Again, image sequence selected, and that comes in, and that basically is my shot there. And then I tell you what we'll do is we're going to bring in one last shot. I think that's going to be 080, and that'll give us 3 shots in which to sort of play around with. And that doesn't exist, so we'll do version 5. Okay, so these obviously brought this footage in. Now we've got this footage that exists here. So the next thing I can do is actually look at what I brought in. So if I select this, you see we've got this tiny little window up here, which gives us just a basic kind of view of what we're looking at, and we can do snapshots. We can play the footage there. We can also change how we're viewing this footage here, so we can basically open it up in our window and view it as more thumbnails and scrub our way through. We can open that like that. You can zoom in and out if you so desire, but for the most case I tend to stick with it kind of like this. We've also got various other options here, so we've got to find feature, creating new bins, and also new items, and we'll come back to some more of these, but this is one of the places where you can create such things as sequences and titles and black video, color mats, etc. So we're going to move on to our next window, which is the source window. So if I double click on here, you see that my file has now opened up in our source monitor, and here I can basically scrub through. I can play through. Now you'll also notice that it's not playing particularly well, and it will get better, because basically what it seems to do is just cache its way through after a few trials. So it basically starts to play back a bit easier. One other thing to help you with that is your kind of sort of proxy mode in which you play it. So this will be full quality, and now that it's cached, it's kind of playing through it reasonably nicely, but you can set that at the start to basically play at various different proxy resolutions, so it makes it a bit easier to play through. What we also have here is various settings. We have our various controls for playing, and most of these are self-explanatory, and if you hover over them they'll give you a kind of idea of what they do, so it's the general kind of playback thing. We'll come back to these, the insert and the overwrite. We can export a frame directly, and what we can do here as well is add some stuff to our sort of timeline controls here if we so wish, and the way to do that is you just basically drag it onto here and then click OK, or you can reset your layout. So we'll cancel that. So basically we now have our footage there. Okay, so what we'll look at now is adding our footage to a timeline. Now at the moment, as you can see here, we have actually no sequences, and as it says up in the program window, we have no sequences as well, so it's not viewing anything. So adding sequences, creating sequences. Now there's again numerous ways of doing this. We'll look at the first way of doing it, which is kind of without using our footage as a guide to what our sequence settings are. So basically, as I say, there's numerous ways of doing stuff. So if we go up to here, we can do a new sequence there, or Control N, but we'll do it from here. So we'll click on that, new sequence, and this gives us this set of options. Now basically these are a lot of presets you can use, so there's various different ones depending on what footage you actually want to work with. As a good starting point, we tend to be working in 1080p, probably 25 frames a second, so DSLR, that preset is possibly a good one to start you off if you so wish. Another one we have here that we might probably use is if we're going to work directly with red footage, which is something we can do. And again, we want our sequence to be either the full range, full 4K, or work at a 1080p but working with red footage. So basically that sequence is designed to work the best way in how playing back that kind of footage. If you select one, we have settings here, so we can change a lot of stuff, and then you can basically create your own presets, and you can create your own tracks here as you see fit. So that's one way of doing it, and if I clicked OK, and I would name it something, this short film is called Turgo, so we'll call it Turgo VR1. Okay, and that will create that, and then that timeline exists there. But I don't actually want to do it that way. So as you can see, I'm just going to save. So remember, save. So first thing we'll do obviously is as we're being tidy, we're going to create a little bin, and we're going to call that O2 sequences. And within that, we'd have our various sequences. So we might have one for latest edit. So that's the one that we're always working on. It's handy if you ever come back to projects, just so that you definitely know kind of where people are. And as we're being tidy, we will create an archive one as well, and that will be where we put all our older edits. Again, just keeping things really tidy, and then, like I say, when people come in, they'll know exactly what edit they're working in. So I want to create a sequence basically that suits this footage here. And even though this footage is quite straightforward, it's as you can see up here, we got our data on that thing, and it's 1920 by 1080p. It's 25 frames a second, and we can also scrub through here. And if I bring this out a little bit, we can see kind of 25 frames a second, and there's our video info again. So we can see what's going on with our footage and make sure that we're working right. It's always best to try and get obviously your sequences and everything right in the first place, because if, for instance, you had to change frame rates or anything like that, it can really screw you up, to be technical. So what I'm going to do is just create a sequence from this project, from this footage, sorry. So I'm going to right click. Within all this, if you right click, you get various options. And we'll go down to new sequence from clip, and that basically sets up a sequence that takes the name from that piece of footage that we brought in, and also retains, as you can see here, 1920 by 1080, 25 frames per second. So it's basically tied to that bit of footage, which is kind of what we want. We want to work directly with the footage correctly. First thing I'm going to do is rename it. So Turgo Edit VO1. So that's our first version, and I'm going to drag it into our latest edit, so everything is nice and tidy. Okay, as you can see over here, then our footage now exists within the timeline, and we can scrub through that, and we can play through that. And again, we have the same issues sometimes with it needing to cache. With this yellow line, that basically means it can play back the footage. It's not got any effects or anything applied to it, which once we do, we'll turn that to red. But we can also create previews, which is something that we will look at a bit later. But for the moment, that's just going to play back, and again, that will cache. Now you'll notice it will stop, but if we click on our little loop there, that will play back and then loop forward. Again, like I say, very similar to the program, the source window, sorry, and with our sort of playback resolution and our timer in out points, duration and stuff. Once you kind of get that, it's pretty straightforward. So we've got some footage here. Now the first thing I'm going to quickly do is basically we want to keep everything looking easy to understand, and one way that we can do that is by using labels. So I'm going to quickly jump to my preferences. I'm going to go to label colors, and if you look here, what we've done is basically various colors and labels. Now I've already changed a few here, so you can go in here and rename these, and you can also select what color you want it to be, but we can set these up to be such things such as done, unused, waiting, whip, previous version, etc., and we can change the colors as we want. As a general probably starting point, you probably want one that ties in with, say, F-Track, or the color labeling that goes on with that, or if you're doing a Google Doc still, then the coloring to do with that. But generally, you know, a green for done, a red for unused, or, you know, wrong, and something that's maybe waiting or previous, you know, version might have a different color there. So it's kind of something that we can look at, making sure our colors are all the same. But I think as a general rule, that's a good starting point. So once we're happy with that, we'll select our footage, we'll go to label, and we're going to set that to done. So this is my done latest version. Now, as you can see here, this sits on my video one, V1, and we've got our various video tracks here. So again, I'm just going to delete those tracks. So right clicking on here, delete tracks, and I'm just going to get rid of the ones that I don't want for the moment, because we can always add others, and others will be added as we go. I can show you how to do that. So this is going to delete video tracks, all empty tracks, okay, and okay, so we're nice and tidy there. So that's my 70 video there. Now I want to bring in my 60. Now obviously 60 comes before 70 in our videos. So what we have here is our various tools in which we can work our timeline. Over here is our tool rack, and if you hover again over these, you can get a little bit of info about what it is and also the shortcut. But the main one we'll start off with is our selection tool. So I'm going to select my footage, and then left clicking and dragging it, just drag it out the way for a second. We don't necessarily need to do that because we have other ways of moving footage, but for just putting stuff in here, this will do nicely. So I'm going to select my shot 60, which is this one. So as you can see, we've got 70 there, so 60. Now we can drag down, and that brings our footage down. And as you can see, I can add a video track if I want. Now I'm going to undo that, Control Z. We also got this here. So if we have a movie which has got audio as well, we can choose to drag down our video as well as our audio. And in this case, we just want to drag down our video because that's all that exists. And we can put that there. Now the other way of doing things, which is one that I don't normally personally use, but because I tend to just drag down and sort of chuck everything on the timeline, is you can use your inserts and your overwrite here. So basically what that does is it takes our timeline scrub bar, and where that is, it will insert or overwrite, and the kind of clue is in the name. So if I click on insert, that'll add footage into where I had my scrub bar there, and as you can see, that kind of shifted everything along. So obviously that's something we need to be wary of, especially if we've got an edit and we sort of insert something and it accidentally ruins the edit so far. The other thing we can do is overwrite. So if I click overwrite, you see it didn't shift across. Now that's great, but if I had my kind of timeline scrub bar there and I click overwrite, you see how it's actually gone over that footage. So that could be something you want, and it might not be something you want. It all depends on what you're trying to do at that point. So going back to the simple way of doing this, we're going to drag down and we're going to put that there, and then I'm going to right click and I'm going to change my label to done. Okay, and what we also want is our shot 80. So again, I can open that here, or I can just drag it straight down from my project bin there. Again, I'm going to put that as done, so it's green. And now, okay, so we've got our footage on our timeline, and as you can see, that will play back and then have gaps where there is these gaps here. It plays back as black footage. So what I want to do is bring these all together. So various ways of doing things, but again, easiest way is just if you select something and drag it, you can move your footage. Now, as you can see, we've got a snap set there, so it snaps to that bit of footage, and that can be controlled up here where we got our snap options. Got a couple of options. The other one that's handy is a link selection, but we'll look at that a bit later. So we can turn that off if we so wish, and then it won't snap anymore. But I will just undo that and put my snap back on because snap is quite handy. And then I'm just going to drag my footage there, and now this will play back as one bit of footage in our timeline. And like I say, it will have little issues with playing back that amount of footage. Now, these issues could be related to numerous things. So at the moment, we're taking our footage off the P drive off the server, so we will probably have issues with that. What you want to do is really have your footage in a local capacity. So whether you've got an SSD, say for instance, or even though it's not great practice to have it on a C drive, maybe have it on your desktop or in a folder, somewhere like that. But again, it all depends on what you're trying to do. The other thing as well is you could look at having it on an external drive connected, and if you do, maybe try and make sure you're using something like Thunderbolt or at least USB 3. So that will play back now. Now, to watch it, I could let it all cache, and it's kind of giving me a reasonably good idea of what's going on here. But what I'm going to do is actually create a preview. So we're going to turn this yellow into green. Up here we got our render in and out, so we can render effects, etc. But rendering out is the one we want. And I've actually set this to be a shortcut of Shift Enter. Now, if you wish to set your own shortcuts, you've got keyboard shortcuts here. You click here, you select what you want to do. So for instance, in this case, I want to go to sequence, my render in and out, and then basically you'd select that and put in your keys and then click OK, and that will create your own little keyboard shortcuts. So I will do Shift and Enter, and now that will render through, and depending on how much you're trying to do, and also depending on what you've already done to it, whether you've got lots of effects on the footage, or you've changed the times, anything like that, it will take as long as it needs to. So we'll just wait for a second. Okay, so we come to the end of, and it's 95%, and we're just going to be 3, 2, 1. So as you can see, that's now created our previews, and it's gone green. And now if I click play, that will actually play back, hopefully, without any issue. Now, one thing to be wary of is your previews are creating a smaller quality, a lesser quality preview. So sometimes it might add issues to what you're seeing. So if you're trying to fully judge what an image looks like, it might not be the best way of doing things. But for editing, in this case, it's probably just the easiest way of doing it, where all we're doing is maybe moving footage and doing the initial edit. So here we have our shots leading, and we can see obviously a few sort of color issues going on here, lots of things, but it's generally kind of cutting together reasonably well. But say we want to actually do some editing. So various ways. Now, the first thing to remember is this is non-linear editing, so we're not actually destroying. It's non-destructive. We're not actually destroying like in the good old days, where you would actually cut a piece of the footage, whether it's film or video, and if you make a mistake, it can be a little bit problematic. Here we can do whatever we want, move stuff around, replicate stuff, and it's not going to affect any of the original source footage. So what we're going to do for this exercise then is basically decide where we're going to start. Now, actually, I want to try and edit where he basically starts moving, and that's going to be my in point. So this is kind of what we're looking for. Now, we've got our left and right arrows, which will move our frames along, one frame at a time, and we can scrub through. We can play. We can also got various shortcuts such as home and end, which will give me I can jump between those positions. There's lots of different ways of doing this, but for this we're just going to set up visually where he's about to start. General rule of thumb with editing is cut on the action. It can really sort of blend your edits together and make it look as good as possible. So we've got a couple of tools here that can basically do our actual physical editing where we trim our footage. Firstly, if I go to the end of a bit of footage, you see this little red kind of bar up here with the little arrow, and you can see the arrow is pointing about which direction I'm going to take a certain bit of footage. If I left click and drag, and remember I've got my snap on, it will then cut that bit of footage there, and now we've trimmed that first bit of footage. So what can we do with that then? So we would then want to bring that bit of footage to here. So we've got a couple of ways of doing it. Easiest way in this situation probably is, to be honest, is just if we left click and drag around, we select both of those and then I drag, and remember I've got my snap on, so it will now create that edit there. Another tool that's very handy, and like I say, you have your tools on here, and hovering above them will give you basically an idea of what they are, and your shortcut is my track select forward tool. So if I click that, or A, and then if I select, click on a bit of footage and select, it selects all of the footage in that direction, and then I can drag and bring that to here. There is other ways of doing this, numerous ways of doing things, all depending on what you're trying to achieve and kind of how you prefer to work. But this is the manner in which I prefer to work with stuff. So we've got our first edit there. I'm going to drag that here because that's the quickest way for me to do it. And then what I'm going to do is basically I'm just going to trim the start of this. As you can see, he's a bit he's still at the start, so I'm just going to grab him literally as the motion blur kicks in. I'm going to remove that bit of footage at the start as I did that, and then I can move that over. Now, what other way can I do this? So I just want to zoom in a little bit, so plus or minus to zoom out, but plus just to really see what I'm doing. And I'm going to use another way of doing stuff, which is basically using the razor tool, the cut tool, which is kind of the old way of doing things. And if I hover over that, so I press the C key, or we've got the razor tool there, and then I can cut that. And now that becomes 2 bits of footage essentially. Now I could move that around and put that in other places if I want, but really what I want to do is delete it. And then again, I'm just going to drag that and put that there, and then that basically is my kind of initial edit. Okay, so that now gives me my my first kind of rough edit for stuff, and then I can play that back and see how that is, and I'm either a bit happier with that or I'm not happy with it. But for the moment, what I'm now going to do is just trim it as he just leaves the frame, because that's the last thing I want to do. There it goes. So I'm using my left and right tools. That's where it goes. And then I'm just going to trim down that bit. Or if I wanted, I could just cut, delete. But as ever with these kind of things, just trimming like that is a one kind of click deal. Okay, so now we've done here basically a very, very simple edit where we've just trimmed off footage. As going back, there is other ways of doing basically our editing. So our main other one is doing the source window. So what I'm just going to quickly do just to demonstrate that is I'm going to create a new Bing because we are ultra tidy. I'm going to do shot 40 because there is no shot 50 in this. And I'm going to import, so Control I, select my footage and bring in my image sequence, making sure that's ticked there. And just out of interest, if I did want to bring in one of these TIFFs as just single TIFFs, I would merely turn it off and import that in. And you can actually see here, actually I didn't do that correctly, so let's do that again. Image sequence ticked off. first one selected, and you can see the difference. If you look over here, you can see we've got this kind of movie film version, and then this icon here means it's a image, and that just exists as a single image. And even though I can sort of scrub through it, I'm not actually scrubbing through anything. So basically I have my shot here. Now I've got multiple versions, so I'm just going to select those. So shift clicking as ever in Windows, and basically I'm going to bring my footage in here. So I actually want to insert my footage into my timeline, basically pushing all this along. So as you can see, the two ways I can basically bring footage in from the source window rather than dragging it down. If I drag it down, it will overwrite like that. If I overwrite, it will obviously overwrite at where my timeline scrub bar is. And then if I want to actually push all this along, this footage, and insert it in there, I click insert, and it will move all that footage along and insert it in the correct place. So again, I have my bit of footage here, so the first thing I will do is just quickly change the label to done, and I'm going to zoom in. Now you can see this bit of footage is not previewed as well, so it's yellow. And what I actually want to do is very, very quickly trim it. So I just want it as he clicks on the red button. So I can use my scrub left and right, so I'm just left clicking here, or I can use my left and right arrows, and I'm just going to take it just before his finger moves off. So there's the point I'm happy with. And then we could do this a slightly different way. I'm going to select all my footage, and I'm just going to drag it, and it snaps to, and it basically overwrites that footage straight away. So as you can see with Premiere, there's lots of different ways of doing stuff, and you'll find the way that you prefer to do things as you go along. But it's just bearing in mind that some techniques are helpful in situations, whereas others don't work. So one example of that would be if I wanted to say find the middle part of this section. So I could quickly trim it like that and trim it like that. But then I can also cut that, and say I wanted to reuse this footage for some reason in a certain place, so I can then move that around and move this here, and obviously this won't make much sense, and then move all this footage here, and then I can move stuff around. So it all depends on what you want to do. Again, undo to be the footage, and say I do these multiple cuts, I can always re-bring down my footage here and plonk it in the place that I want. Now the last thing we'll just quickly look at is basically quickly editing in the source window. So we have our in and out points, and we were manually doing our in and out points using our trim functions directly in the timeline window. So but what I can do here is basically I can scrub through here, I can find my place, I can also scrub through using this, and I can also manually enter in a point if I know exactly what frame I want to work at. And then with this I can mark in, so that's now marked in at that bit of footage. And then I'm going to find my edit out point, which is there, and I'm going to mark that out. And then I can basically bring that down and place that where I want. Or as we'll quickly do this, I can delete this. I can, I've got the gap. I know that's actually going to fit in the gap there, but say I had it like this, and then I can use my insert, and then that bit of footage will exist there like that. So as you can see really from this is there's numerous different ways of doing things. Shift return is my preset, so I now got my previews, and I can really see kind of what's going on. And then basically I'm going to actually trim this as well very quickly, just because I want that as the head turns. So there, I'm going to do it like there. Select that, clicking A for my select all tool, so I can't see the rest of the footage in my timeline, but I know if I click on that, it'll actually be dragging all my footage along with it, and you can see it's all selected there. A couple of other tools that are well worth looking at, for instance, is our slip tool, in which we can take our edits and we can change where our in and out points in, and that retains our actual edit length, which is sometimes very important. If you've already got an edit that's say done to music and it needs to be stay a certain length, but you want to slightly change the edit point, you can do it by doing that. And the other thing as well that's sometimes quite handy, but be very wary of how you use this, is our rate stretch tool, and we can select that and we can drag out our rate, and that's actually changed our timing. So the actual speed of this clip, so as you can see there, it's 39.93%. Now the issue with this kind of thing is that it might cause problems further down the line with how stuff plays back and how stuff exports, so be very wary of when you're doing this kind of stuff. Okay, so that kind of brings us a little bit to effects, which we'll go over very quickly. There's two types of effects really, which are kind of split into either audio and video, but there are actual effects which sit on the footage and actually change the footage, and then there's transitions. So our first one we'll look at, and what I'm going to quickly do is just bring that back to 100%. So I could either use my rate stretch tool, I could undo, but also we've got a speed duration here. I'm just going to manually put in 100%. So if we select our effects window, we've got numerous effects. Now I'm not really going to go into these, but because the majority of these are either self-explanatory or they just need a bit of investigation yourself. But the main things that apply to all of them that we need to just think about is how we apply them to a bit of footage, and then how we keyframe them. Now I'm assuming most of you know how to what keyframing is, but basically it's just adding two keyframes for keyframes for your effect, and then the computer will interpolate between those two keyframes, creating a sense of animation. That can actually be applied to, if I double click on a bit of footage, I've got my effects controls. I can do that with moving stuff around. So very simple one could be that I scale. So I will add a keyframe by clicking on here, move along, and then I'm just going to change that, and it'll automatically, as you can see, add a keyframe. So let's make that 200, and then it does this wonderful little zoom out, which looks pretty terrible, to be honest. And then I can remove those by just clicking on that. But there's a whole, we'll go more into that kind of thing in sort of future lessons. But that can be also used with such effects. So I've got my Gaussian blur, and I'll drag that down onto here. As you can see, that effect appears there. I'm going to add a keyframe, blur is 0. So at that point it is 0. And then I'm going to move ahead to where it changes. I'm going to do 100. And then it basically should go crazy blur there, and you'll see if you hover between there, it's interpolating, so the value is changing to accommodate our 0 and our 100 keyframe. Just going to snap back. So I was using shift there whilst doing it, and it's a snap control, and then I'm going to remove the keyframe. Yes, I do. And basically that's how we would bring effects. So we can bring effects onto this, and you can pile up your effects. And as the more effects you add, you'll get to the point where you'll need to render stuff, and stuff definitely won't play back real time. So the other thing we got here as well is our transitions. So as a rule of thumb, transitions are horrible things. And they all look like they should be out of Top of the Pops. So some of these wipes and stuff we'd never really touch, but the main one that you would always use, and if you right click at the end of a bit of footage you bring up, is our default transition, which is a cross dissolve, and basically that does what it says out the can. So it will dissolve depending on where this is. So I can drag and make the dissolve longer. And at the moment it's dissolving to black because there's no footage there. If I had another bit of footage, say for instance, I put that over that, you'll see how it kind of dissolves into the other footage. And then because nothing exists there, it then cuts to black. So that's a very simple way of doing this stuff. So if I delete that, and then I can basically drag. There's different types of dissolve. Dip to black is handy. Dip to white, obviously, if you want to do that, and you drag that on there, and then that actually does what it says at lock. It's actually dipping to white, but there's not actually any footage that's then going to go onto, so it actually then goes to black because it's kind of going from white to black. Now, if you wanted to work your way around that, what we'll do is we're just going to move this bit of footage up here, and we're just going to create a little color mat. We'll check our size. Yes, we're happy with that. We'll create white, and we'll call that white because we like things nice and tidy. Now you see that's created that in a sort of random place. So I'm actually going to just stick that in and just tidy this up. Make it a bit easier to see what I'm doing. Sometimes this can be a bit of a pain. And I'm actually going to create another bin, and I'm going to call that mats. And in that I'm going to put that white, so we can have all our mats, etc. in that. And I'm going to drag that and put that under. And you see now that dip to white works because we've actually got something white under it. If that was a different color, then obviously it would dip to that color. So basically that's kind of an overview of just kind of the rough sort of editing techniques that we've got, how we can start using effects, how we can bring transitions into play. There's obviously a lot more to this, but that should give you a good idea for just kind of editing and trying out your edits. As I say, golden rule, cut on action. So what we were doing was just trying to trim it so it's kind of on the action, and you can really see when you don't cut on action, sometimes it just doesn't really flow particularly well. So lastly, what we'll look at is just how we would then export our final movie. So we've got our little movie here, and if we go up to export media, so as ever, and I'd encourage you just to look through all this and just try and get a rough idea. A lot of it is sometimes a bit advanced, and you would never use it. Such things as you can directly link to SpeedGrade if you want to do some grading. You can link to After Effects. You can also import batches and recent files and export all kinds of things. So in our export window, we have export media, which is what we're actually going to do. But we can also export such things as EDLs, which is an edit decision list. And that would be a list of what our edit is, and programs can use that to, such as Hero or Nuke Studio, they can use that to bring the edit across. And then such things as XML. If there was audio, there's also an OMF. So if you're working, giving audio to say Coda, they would want an OMF of the edit that you've done. But we're going to click media, and obviously Control M is our shortcut, and it brings up this window. Hopefully it's taking its time. There we go. Had to think about it there. So what we got here is basically, and again, just take your time and just go through it and get your head around it. The first place to start really is what format we're going to put it out. Now, Squint tends to have a H.264 and QuickTime options are the main ones that we would use if we're creating movies, so deliverables. We tend to deliver as DNX HD, and you can basically import presets which are available for us, for Squint, on our library, Squint standards, Premiere, export presets, and you can bring those in there. I've already got those in, so we got our preset, and I can select that DNX HD 1080p, looking at what our settings are. That's quality 100%, 1920 1080, so that matches. And you can see there also, if it was different, it would actually look a bit wrong. So if I change that, I think if I do that one, it's going to start crushing stuff and changing the aspect ratio. So I think I can undo. No, I can't. So I'm just going to change that back. There we go, 1080p. And there's a little button here, we'll just constrain it. So again, this is very similar to things like Photoshop, etc. So if you know your way around this, it should be pretty sort of easy to get your head around. This is creating a movie directly, so we'll quickly look at image sequences as well in a second. But like I say, rendering a maximum depth, rendering maximum render quality, and this will affect how much time. And you can use previews, but obviously you don't want to, because the preview is of a lesser quality anyway. And this DNX HD would in principle be for delivery. Other one you would possibly use is H.264. Again, we have our preset, so we can select that, and that sets it up. And output name, we click on that, we send that to wherever we want it to go. Make sure it's named correctly, and before we're exporting audio if we want, or turn that off if you don't want to. But basically you shouldn't need to worry too much about the settings. Two things you can then do is export, and that will export directly out of Premiere. And what that'll mean is that you can't use Premiere while it's exporting. Or the other thing is Q, and it'll be sent to, as it says, add to Adobe Media Encoder. And basically that's a separate program. So the advantage with that is you can set up lots of videos to queue and then render it at the same time. And also you can use Premiere still. It will obviously take up a fair amount of memory, so it will slow down your working. But it's good if you've got multiple videos you want to render, or if you want to just carry on tweaking something and just set a render going just kind of in the background. The other thing as well, like I said, is we can quickly look at is exporting different kind of formats. So for instance here, and this is the great thing with the latest one, is we've got ProXR, but you've got all your Targa, DPXs, etc. Now if I select, say, Targa, and then that basically here, there's no audio attached to it, but it export video. And the thing just to bear in mind is that you're exporting as a sequence. If you take that off, it will just export the one frame that you was at that point. But if you set your frame rate. Now in principle that shouldn't matter, but it will matter depending on what you're doing within the video. So if you're doing time stretching or anything like that, something that will rely on it being 25 frames as opposed to 24 or whatever, that's something just to bear in mind. Render at maximum depth as you see fit, render quality, etc. Now, basically, if you're ever not too sure about something, just cancel out. But then, yeah, you can either queue and export. And again, there's lots of other options, and within this, there's lots of effects you can add. So you can add LUTs, overlay images, etc., etc. Okay, so that was a brief overview of the basic editing within Premiere, within Squint, how we would like to get things done. Bearing in mind, really, you're keeping things tidy and keeping your folder structure. There is also, I'd encourage you to look at Premiere Help. There's lots of good stuff on that if you ever get stuck. And then Adobe TV and various other tutorials that exist out there. Okay, thanks for listening, and we'll probably be doing some more advanced tips and tricks tutorials in the future, so hopefully see you there. Thank you.